If you were to create a checklist of like let's say you and I are like, on a train together, I just meet you, you're like, hey, I'm a thyroid expert. If I said to you, oh God, I don't know what to do with my thyroid, is there a checklist, a lifestyle checklist that you could give people?
That's a good question. Okay. So first we want to test. I want to see, okay, what are your numbers? So we can really make decisions from there. Like, do you have Hashimoto's? Let's add in some black cumin seed oil. Do you have elevated reverse T3? Let's add in some iodine and magnesium and selenium and vitamin D. That'll help with that. That'll help with conversion. So I would say test, don't guess.
Mm-hmm.
Support with nutrients. So I have my list. I call them the no duh supplements. Like, duh, of course you take these every day. So that is the vitamin D, the magnesium, the iodine. I don't take selenium every day. I tell people, like, eat a Brazil nut every day. Like, get your selenium
I
from
like
a food
Brazil
source
nut.
because
Yeah, agreed.
yeah, I mean, they're loaded with selenium. Just do that. Get out in the sun, reset your circadian rhythm. Definitely. I mean, if you're not sleeping, nothing's happened. Nothing is happening. So you better do whatever you need to do for sleep. And that's a whole other episode, right? The blue light blocking glasses, turning off your computer, getting off your phones, read a little bit before bed, whatever. But you got to be sleeping. And then I would say, let's go over here and yes, make sure you're moving. Movement is imperative for, I don't care whether we're talking about thyroid or type 2 diabetes or heart disease, right? Movement is key. We all have to move. We have to control our insulin. We need to improve our circulation. We need to move. And then there's the diet aspect over here. So over here we go, okay. So we know that gluten containing foods act like a molecular mimicker to the thyroid gland. So what I mean by that is, we talked about your little soldiers. You get these little soldiers and they're just wanting to go out and beat up the thyroid. Now in comes gluten. Of gluten, we have gliadin, which is the protein of gluten. Looks like the thyroid gland in chemical structure. So your soldiers see it coming in and they go, oh, there's an invader. We need to go launch an attack. This is an all-out war here. So those soldiers go out and they start beating up your thyroid gland again. And I get this question a lot. Do I really have to avoid gluten? Oh, it's so cliche. Everybody's gluten-free these days. It's a fad. No, it's not. Because we have science backing the fact that a molecular mimicry happens with gluten and you launch an autoimmune attack. Now, can that be translated to, let's say, celiac, Crohn's, lupus? Yeah. I mean, we're tying gluten into all autoimmune conditions, especially the gluten over here. If I've heard it 10 times, I've heard it 100 times. The people that go to Italy are not affected. Right. So it's the wheat and the gluten and the processed foods here that we really, really have to avoid. And we have to avoid it at 100%. And that would be the lifestyle. That would be the main lifestyle checkbox that I would tell you to check and address. Because once you do that and you change that up, and I know it's hard for a lot of people, I say, listen, go ahead and use the gluten-free versions as a crutch before you move into just eating real food. But you have to do that. If you don't do that, then it doesn't matter whether you're low carb or vegan or whatever you are. It just doesn't matter. You have to be gluten-free.
Yeah. It's funny, when I was in Europe a couple of weeks ago, we were in Denmark with some friends. And I usually when I'm like around, on vacation mode and I'm in somebody else's house, I was like, I'm not going to worry too much about, standing up to being gluten-free. I'm just going to eat the gluten. Like I want to eat the cultural food. And so a week of gluten, you know what the biggest thing, because I don't normally eat gluten, the biggest thing I noticed is my hunger went up. I was famished all the time. And I think that gliadin part of gluten stimulates your appetite. So if you are struggling to understand, okay, I got to stay off gluten because it's going to affect my thyroid, what if there's more motivation if you understood that actually that part of the gluten that breaks down into this gliadin component actually stimulates appetite? And the fact that you can't get your appetite under control may actually be helped by staying off gluten. I don't know if you've seen that with the people you've worked with.
I haven't. That's interesting, though. That's very interesting. So I would think it would be related. Were you wearing a CGM? Because I'm also thinking about Just
I should have.
yeah, like the carbohydrates maybe in the gluten spiking your blood sugar super
Maybe.
high, and then you crash low and get kind of hangry in that low,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just was like, wow. It was like a combination of not skipping breakfast. So I wasn't fasting and I was eating gluten. And after a week of that, it was like, I am famished all day long. And so I came home, started fasting, got off the gluten, which I normally am off, and like immediately the hunger went away. So, an interesting thought I hadn't really wrapped my head around is what do you think Ozempic is doing to our thyroid? Do we have any research on that?
So, yeah, we're actually seeing the positive when
Yeah,
it's
it's
used properly.
okay. What does
So we're
that mean?
seeing an inflammation reduction with
Mm,
these GLPs. When
okay.
they're used, so a lot of biohackers, myself included, are using it in micro doses.
Mm,
So not enough to kill. It does not kill my appetite. I'm using literally like 1 milligram,
mm,
and maybe every other week in a very low
mhm.
microdose. So it's enough to reduce inflammation. We're seeing some brain protection from Alzheimer's, which I have in my family, so I'm all about that. We're seeing slight decrease in antibodies. So, over here I usually use either low dose naltrexone correlate with black cumin seed oil, or I'll use black cumin seed alone if someone doesn't do well on LDN. That reduces inflammation. But then we come over here and we use these microdoses of the GLPs that help with inflammation and lowering antibodies to push
Mm,
Hashimoto's into remission. I think it can actually help. However, the caveat is I also, because there's a flip side to everything, I also
yeah, there
call
is.
these GLPs the Beverly Hills soccer mom drug of choice for weight loss, where these women are using it, they're losing weight, they're not changing their eating, they're starving themselves. Now, guess what? Just like you talked about, hello, thyroid problem,
Yeah.
because you put your body in starvation mode. You've been
Yes.
eating 900 calories a day and 50 grams of protein.
Yes. So you have
Yeah.
to
So
make
I think it
sure.
can help and hurt.
Yeah. And then, you actually have me thinking I might bring Nat onto this podcast because I know she is a fan of triazepam, which is a peptide you can take that acts like Ozempic. And I've been experimenting a little bit with that with some of the patients that I've been working with and seeing good results. So, I think we are rebranding the initial way that we looked at Ozempic, and there
Mhm.
could be some other side effects or some other positive ways to approach this GLP-1, a view of weight loss that we now are all looking through. The thing about lack of appetite is now you're not getting the nutrients in, now you're not getting the calories in. So losing your appetite too much has a dark side, is what I just heard you say.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you're not eating properly, you're not eating enough. You're not getting in the nutrients. You're not getting in the protein. Your body's going to suffer. I
Yeah.
mean, and absolutely, the thyroid gland is I would argue, is the first gland to be hit because it's
Yeah.
so dependent on the nutrient status. It relies on you to properly fuel yourself.
Yeah.
And again, just like we talked about earlier with the fasting topic, if you're not getting in enough calories, that thermostat turns down. So
Yeah.
your metabolism turns down. I was in the competitive world. I did fitness and figure competition. So I'd see the
Mhm.
bodybuilders and figure girls. And, a lot of them, I remember this one girl said she was on 900 calories a day. Well, then after the show, and this happened to me too, after the show, people would balloon up. And I mean, within 2 weeks, they're 30 pounds heavier than they were
Wow.
the day of the show. I mean, A, that's not healthy at all. And B, what happened? Well, they starved themselves getting ready for the show, and their metabolism dial turned all the way down. Thyroid gland tanked. Now they're eating regularly, and they're even doing the
Mm,
reverse dieting, and they're still eating clean. Yeah, you'll have your day of eating pizza and brownies, but then you get back into, the chicken, broccoli, steak, asparagus, but the
mm.
weight keeps coming on. And
Yeah.
that's the perfect example. When we starve ourselves through whatever mechanism, through doing a show and doing a strict diet or using these GLPs and not eating, our metabolism gets turned down and it
Yeah.
absolutely affects the thyroid.
Yeah. So it's like I think with the conversation around Ozempic, what I'm hearing is we always need a long term vision of this, of like again, making sure that lifestyle stays in the equation here and that we don't look for free passes.